Welcome to the Functional Medicine Foundations podcast, where we explore root cause medicine, engage in conversation with functional and integrative medicine experts, and build community with like-minded health seekers. I'm your host, Amber Warren. Let's dig deeper. All right. Hi, everyone. Amber Warren. Welcome back. We're here this evening with Shannon Miles. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Shannon Miles has a long-standing career in the fields of clinical psychology, therapy, and leadership consultation. Holding a master's degree in clinical psychology and recognized as a licensed marriage family therapist, Shannon's more than 25-year career is a testament to her unwavering commitment to catalyzing personal and professional growth. With a multifaceted career that has spanned both the corporate and private clinical practice, her influence extends across diverse spheres. Her grasp of systems theory, attachment theory, behavior and positive psychology, and neuroscience equips her with a unique lens to understand human dynamics and behavior, driving transformative change on individual and team levels. Shannon is also certified in EMDR and brain health.
Certified brain health coach.
Certified brain health coach, yeah. So some really amazing resources for us here at FMI, and we're so thankful for you.
That's probably how we got connected, right?
I'm sure.
Mostly because of that.
Yes. We share a lot of patients across all three clinics, really,
Right.
and we're so thankful to have you in the area. And you're really close to us here in Eagle,
Really
right
close.
across the way,
Right.
which is wonderful. I love Eagle. I love this community. So we want to spend some time. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I feel like on our podcast, especially as of late, we kind of finished talking about the COVID pandemic, and then we morphed into kind of the obesity epidemic and cardiometabolic health, just because so many of us providers here share that passion, and it's so important. But here tonight, of equal importance, and some people might think more important, we're here to talk about mental health, and specifically focusing on anxiety, depression, and a little bit on ADHD. So I'm really excited because I think that this is a conversation that has to be had and has to be shouted from the rooftops on how we can get people feeling and existing better. So let's just start with the general approach. How do you approach those topics?
It's interesting you were talking about metabolic health.
Yeah.
Because my approach is a whole health approach. I've had people come to me who are really interested in not being on psychotropic meds.
Great.
And some people...
What's a psychotropic med for our
Psychotropic medication is anything that treats a psychological or mental health disorder. And it's qualified as a disorder so that insurance can cover things,
Absolutely.
which is helpful for people who need and want to use insurance and need those resources. And some people come in not knowing what's going on. They just know they feel anxious all the time.
Right.
And so I take a whole health approach, which there's a standard 8 questions that I ask people that revolve around whole health and behavioral health, which feeds mental health.
Yeah.
And people don't understand that some of the smallest tweaks they can make can have such a huge impact on their psychological and mental health.
Amazing. So I consider, and I know we have a lot in common about what we consider priorities, and I actually, with my patients, call those non-negotiables. What are non-negotiables that, it is kind of a waste of your time to be here and a waste of your money if you're at least not willing to try and meet me somewhere with this topic.
Yeah.
So where do you usually start?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because for the first time I had someone who we worked really well together, and there were very clear things this person needed to do in order to move forward with their mental health.
Yeah.
And they were not capable at that time of doing it, and unwilling because of the other risks that were implicated for their life.
Right.
And I said, well, our options are, I can support you through that, but you won't be getting your biggest bang for your buck, meaning how you're spending your time.
Right.
And you might get bored in here. And the non-negotiables in therapy really are for you to show up wholly and completely and honestly.
Yeah.
A lot of people will come in and they'll say, I know, I'm just crazy. And I'm like, I actually don't work with quote unquote crazy people. And I really struggle with that terminology. I know it's default language for people. They don't know how else to describe what they're feeling. And I work with really healthy people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be showing up in my office.
Yeah, they wouldn't be seeking your help.
Correct. Yeah. And so the non-negotiables at the end of the day for everyone is you have to be willing and capable, right? If you're showing up, you're very willing to show up, to do the work. Are you willing to do the things that we suggest? There's a give and a take in that relationship, because there are some things that they're not able to do, whether it's financial constraint, time constraint, lifestyle constraint. But we work around those things. And often people, I may give them suggestions or recommendations on health changes that they can make to feel better, and they don't do them, which is information.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
That's just
Absolutely.
information for me about what's going on, because that's the ADD piece often will show up, and I watch them try and they can't. And it's a diagnostic indicator often.
Yeah.
Not always, but
Right.
often.
Right. So what do you see? Are you seeing more? I mean, my husband and I were listening to actually a sermon yesterday, and they were sharing some really, like, I knew these statistics were staggering, but he was focusing more on the adolescent population coming out of COVID. And it was so sobering to hear some of these. So what, are you seeing that? I mean, is it anxiety? Is it more depression? Is it a beautiful combination of the both in our adolescents and young adults? What are you seeing in clinical practice?
Most in particular, I work with the young adult population as far as those ages are concerned.
Yeah.
And absolutely, without question, it's anxiety.
Okay.
And that's one of the primary
Yeah.
focuses. So maybe my lens is skewed in that
sure.
respect.
Right,
That's
right.
what people come to me for.
Yeah.
But it seems, I have said it's job security
Yeah.
because there's so much going
That's
on.
the sad truth, yeah.
Right? There's so much going on with our food, socially, with social media, with how people do or don't take care of themselves, and the attachments that we have in our relationships.
Right.
You throw COVID on top of that, and people think COVID's over, but there's that butterfly effect where things just continue to fall out years later. And I think there's a particular group of people between probably 20 and 28 that have a different kind of effect than anybody else who was like out in the working industry and
So
just living
true.
life.
And that's because they were like in college, in first-time jobs, entering into these
Super
relationships
isolated
when all
at a
this hit,
time
yeah.
where they're supposed to have social relationships.
Right.
Missing out on information of daily life and really
Right.
hooked into what social media is telling them they have.
Yes.
Right?
So
People
true.
self-diagnosing because of what they see on social media.
So you're seeing that a lot. Are people coming in way off kilter as far as what their actual diagnosis
No,
is?
not way off kilter.
Okay.
But the extent to how intense they experience it is different than how I view it from a diagnostic perspective.
Okay.
So you can have symptoms of anxiety or depression or ADD or any of these other things. You can have symptoms of them. That doesn't mean you qualify as having a disorder.
Right.
One of the things that I see happening particularly with anxiety is there's a whole population of people that would rather just take a pill than feel it, develop skills around it, and figure out how to go through it, and then have developed those skills for later on in life.
And so what do you see as the main issue with just taking a pill
Well,
to fix anxiety?
this is the wheelhouse here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do I see as the main issue? It's a Band-Aid. I'm never going to say that psychotropic medication isn't valuable, because it's hugely valuable, and sometimes it is absolutely the magic bullet for some people.
Yeah.
But there are so many other things that we can try first.
Yeah.
And so my approach, and people that work with me know that this is my approach, we try all the other things first, and we don't drag it on.
Right.
We try all the other things, and when it's not working, then we make sure that you get seen by an appropriate professional. I prefer that people who actually need psychotropic medication work with a psychiatrist
I figured you did. Yeah.
rather than a general physician. I think a
Yeah.
general physician is amazing when you're in a crisis and you need to kind of get out of that crisis quickly. But for someone who works specifically with the brain and medication, you want them to see the things that somebody who doesn't have that specialty can see.
I would agree. Yeah, that when that's all they do. So even offline a little bit, we were talking about how similar we are on, like, as simple as a topic. It sounds simple, but it's not. Sleep.
Right.
Optimizing sleep. Why is that so important when it comes to mental health?
So, as you're well aware, it doesn't affect just mental health, right? It affects your physiological health. It affects your metabolic health. It affects your gut health. I mean, it's all the things. And I start when I do what I label it the whole life assessment, just so we can understand what's going on. And it's different than a mental status exam where we're trying to understand what someone's experiencing psychologically.
Right.
The whole life assessment is for me to understand how you move through the world behaviorally,
Right.
and the things or the ways that what you're doing may be fostering symptoms of anxiety or depression.
Okay.
And sleep is the number one. particularly because so many people lay in bed and they're on their phones till 12 o'clock. I have so many people that say, well, I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and that's hormones or liver function or cortisol, and I get on my phone.
I know.
Or I get up to use the bathroom and I get on my phone.
Yeah. I just want to see what time it is.
Right.
And I'm like, just buy a clock. Buy a clock and hang it in your bathroom.
Right. And so it's just such an addictive thing. Even for me, I'm not really on it, but it's so easy once you get on it to just get lost in the sauce, right? So to speak.
Yes.
So I really focus on having people figure out what is their optimum level of sleep. And they'll say, oh, I can function on 6 hours of sleep.
Yeah, everybody knows when they feel best.
Yeah.
They know that threshold.
You might be able to function on 6 hours of sleep, but when you're talking about long-term brain health, which I also is a huge passion of mine, is to ensure that we have healthy brains as we age, right? If you aren't getting the right amount of sleep that you need, not only are you putting yourself at risk for all these things that we've already touched base on, but you're putting yourself at risk for I was going to say diabetes, which is true, but I had them mixed up in my brain. Diabetes, dementia, and Alzheimer's.
Significant,
right? And you can't miss out on all the sleep and then crash on the weekends and think you're going to make it up, right?
I think it's still true. The number one, the most significant time for people to die of a cardiovascular event is that springtime flip.
Right.
When everyone's robbed of that hour of sleep. So that is so telling.
Is this Sunday?
Oh, goodness, don't tell me that. Okay, we got to prepare for that. But it's so telling that shift in our circadian rhythms and that sleep deprivation, how significant that is on our system.
Well, and you look at the other indicators like car accidents go up.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
It has a huge impact on the nation financially because of the impact on insurance companies and whatnot. So it's across the board.
Oh, my goodness.
Not a great thing.
And on that same topic, and I've said this to a fair amount of patients lately, with what we're doing and the skill sets that I'm going to say you and I and the wonderful team that we're surrounded by have in how we can help to optimize sleep and hormones and just cellular functioning in the body, and where you come along and help us with all of that, how many marriages could we save? How many relationships between parents and a teenager, adolescent could we help and potentially save? How many lives could we suicide, like it's really, really astounding when you start to think about, and who was I having this conversation with, changing a marriage and how that impacts multiple generations.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it's just so significant when you think about it that way.
There's a number of things that when I talk about sleep only, what people end up realizing is they have more energy. They're less grumpy, right? They're more tolerant. They can employ any of the skills that they do learn. They feel better in general. And again, you're spiking your cortisol if you're not getting enough sleep.
Right.
One of the most interesting things that I had learned when I was going down this path of my education, and this is post-graduate school when I started diving into this. They don't talk about this in graduate school, at least not when I went, but that was a really long time ago.
Oh, stop it.
And so just changing your sleep by a 30-minute window spikes your cortisol.
It's wild.
Yeah, it really is. And you can see it.
That's why I tell my patients, like, there's no snooze. Like, whoever created the snooze button is the devil. Like,
so this is a key point, actually.
Have your alarm go off and get up.
Well, I'm going to jump in on this, and I don't know if you know this term or not, but I am all over the snooze button because of sleep inertia.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you hit the snooze, your brain wakes up, and you go back in and your body tries, or your brain tries to hit another sleep cycle. And that sleep inertia ends up making you feel drunk,
more
hungover, sluggish, angry. Some people wake up and they're angry about it.
Yeah.
And you're missing out on really a key sleep stage. The beginning of the night, we have a lot of our deep sleep and some REM, but a lot of people get the majority of their REM in those morning hours. And if people will say, oh, I'm dreaming all night and it's stressing me out. Well, what's actually happened is you're waking up from your dreams. Right. And you're processing. That's what you're doing in your sleep.
So what are some skill sets that you use to help people not only fall asleep? Because I always ask, so let's talk about more of your insomnia that you mentioned in the paperwork. Is it falling asleep or staying asleep or waking up too early?
Correct.
So let's talk about some of the resources you give to patients to help with either of those issues.
Well, I have people start with sleep hygiene because that's one of the hardest things for people to employ
Yeah.
is just having a sleep schedule
Right.
and a routine before
Right.
sleep. One of the best ways to be able to have the routine is also something that positively impacts sleep, which is to put your phone away a minimum of 45 minutes before you're doing lights out, right?
Good.
And so if you're doing lights out at 11 o'clock, then your phone is plugged in away from you. It cannot be on your nightstand. If it can be in an ensuite bathroom, it can be on your dresser, but at least 10 feet away from you. And so starting there and then creating a sleep routine. Are you a person who would thrive on having an Epsom salt bath to relax you? Having a really great skincare routine? Wouldn't that be fabulous to make sure you incorporate, right? You know, taking the time to brush your hair, your teeth, those kinds of self-care things. It can even be meditation.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things that indicate to your brain it's time to quiet down. It's time to calm down. And so if they get in bed at 11 o'clock and it's lights out and you're asleep within 5 minutes or so, that's a good thing. If you hit the pillow and you are out, you are overly tired.
You're sleep deprived.
You're
Yeah.
sleep
Yeah,
deprived.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you lights out 11 o'clock and you find yourself kind of restless and laying around, you can utilize progressive muscle relaxation. So I'll walk through with people what that exercise looks like. There's a lot of fabulous YouTube videos on it, and or breathing techniques for meditative breathing that will help
Great.
people's bodies relax. One thing that I will have people do is really practice this breathe in, breathe out technique.
Good.
When you breathe in, you say breathe in your mind. When you breathe out, you say breathe out in your mind. And there's an interesting little pause before you breathe in again. And I'll have people pick a word or multiple words. Sleep, breathe, relax. And you just get in this rhythm. It can create anxiety at first for people because they're trying to,
Remember
am I
how to do it,
breathing?
yeah.
How do I breathe? When a thought comes up, just look right at that thought and just say, see you, I'll deal with you later. It's time to sleep. Let it pass like it's floating by on a cloud. And then tell themselves to come back to breathing. And typically most people will report back the next week that employing those things together, their sleep is better.
Good.
The kicker is, did you get enough protein? And did you cut your caffeine?
Yes.
I've
So,
got people that
I wanna
come
go to food
in,
next.
and I would say more than 75% of the people that I work with that come in and they say that they have anxiety, the first thing I ask them is how much caffeine they're drinking.
Ooh, really? That's great.
And it's off the charts. It's off the charts the amount of caffeine people drink. And people don't realize that caffeine is actually a depressant, right? As much as it gives you energy and it provokes anxiety, but it is also a depressant.
Well, and it has such a long half-life.
Right.
So I'm like, wait, you're doing what at 3 p.m. with
Bingo.
to pick up your kids
Any
at school?
caffeine afternoon, and the majority of people have some kind of effect from it. Not to just totally jump tracks, but the MTHFR gene defect for people who cannot methylate certain things, which is a large percentage of people, 25 to 40% of people have this gene defect, can't methylate the caffeine, can't methylate the alcohol, can't methylate just the coffee bean in general, and that will negatively impact sleep as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that topic of foods, we've got caffeine. You mentioned protein.
Protein.
What are you recommending in protein and why when it comes to
So it
this
depends on the
topic?
person. Everybody's different, and everybody's physiological needs are different preferences. I'm a person who I need a high protein diet, and I would say for the most part during the day, I'm probably 75% plant-based, including proteins.
Yeah.
Dinner's really the only place that I'll eat like a meat protein.
Yeah.
And for most people, they're not even getting 100 grams of protein.
I know.
They think that
wild.
25 grams is a lot. And I have this woman, she keeps sending me these social media videos where it says, here I thought I just needed to exercise more, but no, now I'm spending all my time tracking protein, right?
I mean, it's true. It is like a part-time job
it is a part-time job.
to get it in. Yeah.
It really is.
Wow.
And so, so I usually, and I have a nutrition background.
Yeah. Oh,
And
wonderful.
I was a bodybuilder back in my 20s.
Yeah.
And so I calculate it based on brain and physical health. So 0.8 grams per pound of ideal body weight at minimum.
Yeah.
minimum.
And so I'm just curious from a mental health perspective, the importance of protein. Why is that so important?
Well, it's the building blocks for your body. And I don't actually know, you probably know this part way better than I do, and you could educate people way better. But what I see is it has an impact on brain function and decreasing your cortisol and building muscles. And I see it way more important, a way more important factor for depression and ADD. Like ADD folks need even more protein. Because their brains crave carbohydrates that they will often just binge on the carbohydrates to get that dopamine hit. And for people with anxiety, it's just a lifestyle benefit to make sure that they add it as a focus.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you would have to say about that.
Yeah. I mean, you hit it spot on with saying it's the amino acids, right? Because we build all those neurotransmitters that calm down our body and our brain from these amino acids, right? So it's kind of the offspring of that. But I think the secondary reason is also that you're going to feel satisfied, you're going to feel satiated, you're fueling your brain, you're fueling your cells, and so you're not going to reach for the more toxic foods and toxic choices that are going to cause the further anxiety and the cravings and the sad mood. And I mean, let alone we need the protein and phytonutrients for gut health, and that's where 90% of our serotonin is made too. So if we're seeking to boost serotonin in the body, like we have to start with gut health and we have to start with nutrition when we're trying to fix the gut. So so many of those reasons.
Well, one of the things I will talk to people about is vitamins that I consider lifetime vitamins.
Yeah, that's great.
Right?
Yeah.
That they're just great for your whole health. Some people will say, well, I took it and I didn't feel anything. Yeah. I'm a pretty functional, stable, and I take my vitamins whether I feel it or not.
Yeah.
I don't really ever feel them.
Right.
But I know that they're really vital, and it shows up in your blood work if you're paying attention to your blood work, right? And so I often talk about Perfect Aminos actually as a brand.
They're the
Unless
best.
you have a better,
No,
you like them,
no,
you
they're
say
the
they're the best. That's great.
No,
Perfect
they're the best.
They are hiding up there.
I mean, I think they're like our top seller here.
Yeah. So Perfect Aminos, particularly people that have ADHD. And as I'm saying that, I can hear people asking me what the difference between ADD and ADHD is.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to qualify.
Let's go there.
So ADHD is the standard old school DSM, Diagnostics and Statistics Manual diagnosis, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And for people that have the H, the hyperactive piece, sleep is really just something they're constantly chasing, and it is very frustrating to them.
Yeah.
And so you approach sleep a little bit differently for those folks, and too much to get into because it's very person specific. Yeah. But ADD itself, attention deficit disorder, it's without the H. And if you have ever heard of Dr. Daniel Amen, he types different types of ADD. He says there's 6 or so types: inattentive, hyperactive, limbic, ring of fire, impulsive type, and there's temporal lobe, I think is the other one. There's always 1 or 2, I forget. And the most common one that I see, particularly with women, and particularly perimenopausal and menopausal women, is just inattentive ADD, right? That's the most common one. And they'll get diagnosed and they'll say, oh, I always thought I was just a problem, or I was the weird kid, or I got told I was lazy. But you see this cycle of inattention, anxiety, depression in women often. And so those are some of the things that I kind of keep track of. And Perfect Aminos, to bring it back to that,
Yeah, I love it.
is one of the core vitamins that I would recommend to people when they have that.
So you think you're seeing it more in these peri and postmenopausal women because of estrogen deficiency?
Yes.
Because of what estrogen does to the brain? Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons I refer to FMI so often, is because you guys are willing to dig deeper and to look beyond. You're within the normal range on any of your hormones. You might be in the normal range. But
or how about just to check hormones?
Not normal for. I do have some people that refuse to check their hormones. Not clients, but their physicians refuse to check hormones, and that is shocking to me.
It breaks my heart. I'm like, oh my gosh, are we missing on this like vital information on the importance of hormones?
So I ended up referring somebody to you who I've known for years, and this person worked their butt off in therapy. and said something very key. Hadn't seen her for a while. Said something very key, and my ears perked up. And I started to ask more questions. They came in to FMI and finally understood how estrogen shows up for them. It can make you look like your ADD if it's too low or too high. You end up looking like you have anxiety if it's too high. So just the imbalance alone, and because of the age that I am and watching myself, my friends, my clients go through it, it feels like the needle in the haystack sometimes.
Yeah, we need to recognize that more often. That's for sure. And knowing even that now perimenopause can last, premenopause, pre and peri can last
10
up to a decade.
Yeah,
so it's like,
so
oh my gosh,
fun.
we have to capture these
so
women
fun.
and get them help.
And so if I send somebody, when I see something and I say, I really think you should talk to your physician and get your hormones checked, and they come back a week later and they're like, they refuse to check my hormones, and they say, it's just a spot in time. I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah.
Let's go to FMI.
They need to know when to
you can
check
do a saliva test.
Yeah.
You can do the Dutch test, which frankly, I love the Dutch test.
That's just great.
Yeah, because it measures the cortisol and how you actually metabolize the hormones
amazing.
and whatnot. So
Yeah, it's
I love
amazing.
it. That's
And
a
the
little
Dutch-
soapbox for me.
No, it's great. And I love the Dutch, you're referring to the Dutch Complete because it also includes some markers of oxidative stress and B6 and glutathione, which is your body's master antioxidant. So to me, it's like people are like, should I spend the extra money to look at cortisol? I mean, yes, because you also get 10 other biomarkers that really help us look at cellular function. So it's wonderful.
Are you tired of cookie cutter health that doesn't address your unique needs? It's time to discover functional medicine care designed to help you flourish. At FMI, you'll gain access to a range of benefits tailored to support optimal health and longevity. Experience the power of personalized care and take control of your health with an annual membership at FMI Center for Optimal Health. Visit www.fmioptimal.com/membership today and start thriving.
So food, I want to talk more about the relationship between food and mental health because I think this is so significant. So what else are you recommending on how food impacts the topics?
That people eat.
Yes. That people actually consume. Okay, so not just protein, but other aspects of food. Okay.
Just eating in general.
Yeah.
Right?
Great. And get their micronutrients in.
It's so busy.
Yeah.
Life is so busy, right? That they forget to eat, or they've got to hurry up and jump on a call for work, and they end up neglecting basic nutrition.
Well, and we're in this era where intermittent fasting, you can take a lot of pride in it, right?
Yeah,
And that's
do
pretty
like to
dangerous.
talk about intermittent fasting depending upon how they do it.
Well, and everybody's different, right? So not everyone
Correct.
should follow someone on Instagram and jump in the bandwagon
Right.
of jumping into a 16 or 18-hour fast, not knowing their hormones, not knowing their cortisol level,
Yes.
not knowing where their nervous system
Huge
is.
difference. I was an aggressive faster
Okay.
around 45-ish, and
Yeah.
I was in the healthiest body I have been in my entire life.
Yeah.
And that changed dramatically when I was actually going through menopause.
Yeah.
You cannot do that to your body because it spikes your cortisol,
Yeah.
and you don't want to be doing that when you're menopausal.
Yeah.
So it definitely changes.
Yeah.
And people will say, "Oh, I do intermittent fasting," and I have to ask them what that means to them.
Yeah. That's,
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Because
you
some
can do it in
people-
so many different ways.
What they're really saying is the majority of people say, "Well, I am eating between these hours," and they consider that intermittent fasting.
It's true.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's well, I restrict it to an 8-hour window or a 6-hour window. I haven't met a single person who was doing it the way I was taught to do it,
Yeah.
which was very aggressive.
Yeah, because they're following someone on social media.
Exactly.
listening.
Yeah. And I think there's amazing benefits.
Oh.
Like burning the toxins off your liver, and kind of doing
Absolutely.
an internal cleanse. You have so much energy, right? You burn off that visceral fat. Your mind is so much more clear, but it's really about burning the toxins off.
Yeah.
And I do really focus on people. I don't care how often they eat. I think that's a very individual thing, but making sure that they're having kind of a stable blood sugar and not crashing.
Good.
And I talk about the difference between hunger, and hunger.
Good.
Right?
Good.
So if your stomach is growling, you might actually just be dehydrated. Right?
Or not consuming enough protein.
Or not consuming enough protein.
Yeah.
I describe kind of the foggy feeling people get when they're not eating enough protein, or they feel a little anxious. They don't have enough protein in their system.
Do you ask your patients, I'm curious, to read labels and look at chemicals, or do you rely on our team to do that for you?
So I am a huge proponent of that. I was thinking of a funny story for you before on my way in here. When my son was 5, I made him read labels.
Wonderful.
And I have, it is like it was yesterday because he's 16 now.
Yeah.
He would pick up, he wanted grocery store granola bars, not homemade ones.
Yeah.
And so he would pick up the boxes and I said, that's fine, but it can't have this, this, or this
Yeah.
in it. And if you could find a single granola bar that doesn't have these things in it,
Probably can't do it.
and he couldn't. One of the things he would pick up, he's like, soy lecithin again.
Yes.
And he would put it back
He'd
on
be
the
upset.
counter, right?
Yeah.
And these 2 ladies were standing there like, is he really reading that? And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, he is.
You have to learn how to read what's in
Yeah,
it.
educate them.
I do talk a lot, particularly when I used to work with children a lot. I don't really work with children at all. I
Right.
would prefer to work with the parents to educate them
Has to start there.
on how to support
Yeah.
their child. Dye,
Good.
corn syrup,
Good.
gluten, and not gluten in the sense that wheat is evil, but
Right.
the Americanized version of wheat is not great,
Yep.
right? And so talk about how to find other things that their kiddos can eat,
Good.
and referring people out for allergen testing, which can tell you some things, but not all things. But it's really trial and error. I've got one person who I've worked with, and her child was absolutely without question allergic to red dye. And it showed up as rage. Yeah. So
But do you think that's a true allergy, or do you think that's just like more of a sensitivity that the body
Well,
just doesn't know? Like,
that's how she would describe it, would be an allergy.
well,
But it
you
was
you
really
have to
that
describe it as
it's a
that, so the
toxin.
schools keep it out of them, and so when they go to birthday
Correct.
parties, because it's.
Correct.
I mean, I'm in that world where I have to say, like, my kid. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Kids
It's
allergic
not
to that.
hives and
Yes.
anaphylaxis. It's
Yeah.
behavioral.
Yeah. I view it as like, and I've explained this before to patients, it's like a conveyor belt, right? And the body knows, okay, here's protein, here's gluten. We know what to do with this. Red dye? Blue 40?
Any
Yellow
dyes.
70? Yeah. What?
Any.
High fructose corn syrup? We don't know what to do with this. And it just gets overwhelmed and overloaded,
Yeah.
and the body just freaks
I
out.
used to work in a residential care facility when I was in my 20s that was a step down from a lockdown.
Okay.
And it was for kids who had they were residential, so they went to school there and they lived there. But they had severe behavior challenges, severe developmental disabilities, and anything from nonverbal autism up to learning disabilities or high functioning autism. And there was a child there that was actually allergic to corn, just corn.
Wow.
So
That's tough.
it was really ugly what would happen for this person. And it was a physiological reaction. And then it would then affect their behavior because they didn't developmentally have
Right.
the tools to be able to communicate what's going on for them.
That's so hard.
Yeah.
So this is actually a really good segue talking about children and 2 screens. And not that we need to focus on screens,
Not
because
just
we all,
children.
we all have issues too.
Yeah,
you
just
talking
not
about,
children.
it's
Yeah.
like this addiction of just looking at your phone to see what time it is.
Yes.
What happened to looking at a clock?
Mm-hmm.
But I was at my 9-year-old's basketball game a couple of weeks ago, and there was this little boy next to me and next to my son who had his own iPad. It's like, makes me sad. These colorful iPads are like for kids to hold. I'm like, what?
But they hold them like this.
Right in their face. So he was watching, his older brother was playing basketball, and he had an iPad and then like 3 candy bars next to him. And it just breaks my heart. And I think I live in my own little world where I'm like, I think this is probably more common than I think, but
Yes.
I do life with people who are like-minded and kind of live a life like we do. But I'm like thinking, it's so sad to me. Why can't this little boy, who's probably 6 or 7, watch his brother play basketball?
Yeah.
It's not like we're at a church sermon or a boring lecture, or there's, a counseling appointment where mama just needs to listen and you have to entertain them.
Yeah.
You are at your siblings'
Yeah.
like, it's exciting. There's a bunch of boys playing basketball. Cheer him on, son.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I
where are
think
we
that-
at?
I have to play the devil's advocate on this one. I'm not a fan of screens, particularly for kids. Not a fan of candy, obviously. There are times where a kid may have a behavior challenge that we don't know of.
I love your perspective on that.
Don't have a place for them to be on that particular night, and he actually can't. And so maybe the kiddo does have ADD. Let's use this as an example.
Yeah.
And they need to hyper focus on, or maybe they're
So that mom and dad can watch their son's basketball
or
game.
maybe they're on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
And that amount of stimulation is too much for that child, and they need to, hyper focus on something.
love that
so it's just a different perspective because we
love
don't know
that.
what goes on in somebody else's home.
Yeah.
And I mean, it would be great to say, I can't believe that parent let that child, but we don't know.
I don't know. I
what's
don't have an
really going
autistic
on.
child.
Yeah,
I
we
wouldn't
just
know how to
that
handle that.
We wouldn't do that for our child
Yeah.
because we started them off that way, right? It's
Yeah.
really hard once you do give kiddos screens to train them to be in social settings or to be socially appropriate in settings. It's hard. You end up having to engage in behavior modification effectively in order for them to be able to do that and have pro-social skills.
So I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate as well. Don't you think that what that child was engaging in is part of the reason that we have the autistic statistics that we do today? As far as root cause?
I actually don't. Having worked with autism since like 95.
Okay.
No. I was in the era in 95 where it was autism is caused by immunizations, right? And we know that the physician that came out and started that lost his license because he lied. And so I am a proponent of people making their own decisions about immunizations and what's right for their family.
Yeah, good.
And the environment that we lived in at the time, people weren't immunizing their children and they were getting really sick. And so you have to make the decision for your family.
Absolutely.
I know that was misinformation. And what I will say, having worked in it and so long, is it may look like the rates of autism are going up because of screens, when in actuality, they took all these different diagnoses and folded them into the umbrella of autism.
Oh, okay.
So it used to be Asperger's, which is high-functioning autism, Rett's, childhood disintegrative disorder, and one other that I never, ever could remember the name of, and they collapsed them into one umbrella, which really helps funding for those kinds of disorders.
Do you think it's also that we're recognizing and diagnosing these disorders?
Absolutely. And here's what I think is so interesting is to see people who, my son always goes, you think everybody's autistic? And I'm like, that person's autistic, and here's how I know. And he's like, how do you know that? Yeah. And somebody we know, I said, how do you guys handle this type of, social engagement? This is what I think is going on for this person. And he denied it. And then it turned out that person actually was diagnosed. And it was just such an eye-opener for them to see people can be really just look like typical functioning, but how they're experiencing the world is very different on the inside.
Yeah.
So I think autism is actually out there at a much higher rate, and I feel like it has more to do with the toxins in our gut health.
Okay, so you think that's more of it?
I think it's more of that. I don't think that screens help anybody for any diagnosis.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what toxins do you think are playing a role? Can we say autism, anxiety, and depression? Have you been able to identify? Or you just think it's this total toxic burden?
I mean, I think there's a toxic overload for sure, but I know that what's in our food and what's on our food is probably the worst thing. Like we had the fortune, and most people don't, to be able to choose to eat organic. It's not a thing. Where we lived at the time, it was all farm fresh food. We went to the farmer's market, right? And it was all organic farmer's market food, $20. We would fill up the basket of my son's stroller and walk there and walk back. It's just where we lived. It was a dream in that respect. But not everybody has access to that. Not everybody really understands how much better they feel when they're not putting that in their bodies.
So you said anxiety is probably the most prevalent diagnosis you're seeing. Would you go as far as to say our toxic world is driving the anxiety and that's why we're seeing so much of it?
I just had a huge reaction in my head when you said that because I think it's emotional toxins.
Yeah, fair.
Right?
Yes.
And what I'm thinking about is that the anxiety is from lack of secure attachment with people.
Okay.
Right?
And what's causing that?
Family. starts in your
Just
family.
family dynamics.
Yeah. There's
Family of origin.
Yeah, family of origin. Lack of secure attachment. One of my favorite books, I think is by Levine, is just called Attached.
Oh, okay.
And it is a red and white book. It looks like two magnets in the shape of a heart. And it really dives into and lets you do a little bit of an assessment on your attachment style.
Cool.
And there's so much anxious attachment if we don't have secure attachment as a child. And there's a number of reasons that could happen. You could have the most loving, kind, amazing family in the world, but dad has to travel a lot. And that generates a sense of abandonment or fear, right?
Yeah.
There's so many different reasons that would happen.
Yeah.
But also just the trauma that people perpetrate on each other is horrific.
Yeah.
It's really, there's big trauma and small trauma in
I know,
in
big
the
T,
trauma
little
word.
t.
Big
Like,
T,
oh,
little
I've almost
t.
come to hate using the word trauma
Yeah.
clinically when I'm talking to my
It
patients
can
because
be
it's such a trigger word.
overused.
And they're
Yeah.
like, no, like I hate that everyone keeps trying to tell me I've had trauma. And I'm like, okay, let's word it a little bit differently
Yeah.
because it dramatically impacts your health and I need to know this.
And I talk to people about big T, little t,
Good.
the way you said it too.
Good.
I
Yeah.
use the same language. And
Good.
big T might be a single car accident that you thought you were going to die in.
Right.
Right? Little
Right.
T might be you were being ostracized from your friend group in middle school because
Yeah.
you wore the wrong shirt that day or
Yeah.
something, right? But it still has an impact on your sense of security because all of that emotional security is based in safety in relationships because we
Yeah.
need attachment to have safety in the world,
Yeah.
right?
So true.
So you think about the caveman days, and if you don't have somebody that cares for you and you're left behind, you're toast, right?
And what that does to your nervous system as it develops. So this hits home as a mom of young boys, and just on that same topic of like changing generations. What can we do as parents of young children to make sure that our children have
Secure attachment.
confident attachment, secure
Yeah.
attachment? Yeah. What would you recommend?
You know, it's interesting. I was doing this before I knew what it was, but when you follow attachment theory, attachment parenting is, in my opinion, super valuable. It doesn't mean you wear your baby or breastfeed them till they're 5 years old, right? It's some variation of what works for you.
Yeah.
And it's, if they're crying, you support them.
Yeah.
You don't spank them.
Right.
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 And that includes the concept of sleep training, right? There's a lot of information about what sleep training is or isn't and how you can do that in a way that promotes secure attachment.
Without crossing that line of abandonment.
I use this example often. When my little guy was probably 18 months old, we were walking to the park with my husband's college best friend, well, childhood best friend. Their parents went to college together, so they're like family. And for whatever reason, I couldn't even tell you what it was, my son started crying and he didn't want to continue to walk. And so he was having a tantrum. And I just sat down with him and I just reflected the emotion. Even at 16, I reflect the emotion to him, right? I know you're angry and you cannot act your anger out on people. I know you're feeling sad or you're disappointed or you're frustrated. And giving them emotional language to be able to understand it, how it shows up in their body, and what to do with it, and just validating and reflecting is probably one of the biggest gifts you can give them
Oh, I couldn't agree
into
more.
adulthood.
It reminds me of the book that it's been a while since I've read about The Whole Brain Child.
Yes, I love that book.
So good.
For anybody that has a child with any type of behavior challenges or
Yes.
any type of diagnosis.
Even a little bit of anxiety here and there.
Absolutely.
So good.
That book is fabulous.
Yeah, I know you feel scared, and here's
Yes.
it's okay to
Yes.
feel scared, but here's why you shouldn't feel scared right now,
Right.
buddy.
And
Yeah.
we often default to our parents' parenting style, right?
Yeah.
And so my friend said, well, at what point do you just smack his butt and you tell him, let's go? And I said, well, first of all, he's 18 months old.
Yeah, he doesn't understand.
He
that.
won't understand that.
Yeah.
And that will evoke a power over message, right? Where he is only behaving out of fear,
Right.
right? We want to establish power with. So he has an implicit way of being in the world that he does things because it's the right thing to do,
Yeah.
not because he's afraid. And he didn't have kids at that point. He was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we had a really cool conversation out of it. But to be able to be with your kid when they're
Yeah.
having difficult, because
And not
mirror
against 'em.
neurons
Yeah.
will tell you that what your child is feeling is yours, and you
Yeah.
will actually experience the feeling that they're feeling physiologically and psychologically. And then, of course, anger evokes anger, right? But we have to be able to call it out and articulate it and reflect it. And that's a skill most people don't have. I usually say people cut themselves off from the neck down. They don't know how to label.
Yeah, what's going on.
They don't have the emotional IQ to label things outside of mad, sad, and glad.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I'm thinking about, I was talking to a young couple doing premarital counseling right now, and just having this conversation making me think, as a society, I like to think we place importance on premarital counseling. Maybe it's not a thing anymore. But what about preparatal counseling? Like, what an amazing concept.
I mean,
like,
I
so I
really
could
feel like
recommend
there should
these.
be a pre-parenting screening at this point.
You tell me how we're going to pull that off, and I will get on board, girlfriend.
You cannot pull that off.
But like giving these young, I mean, I wish I would have had access to that before I had my first little boy. I wasn't doing functional medicine yet. I wasn't practicing functional medicine in the clinical aspect. And I read all these books from pediatricians on sleep training, and I know it's why he doesn't cuddle, and he feels anxious, like a bad guy's going to come, and it's like, so is it too late for maybe parents that maybe didn't follow those trends yet? Like, are there?
Because I've heard things like, what do you mean by too late?
Well, like I've had girlfriends recommend to me Emotion Code for like my little boy that maybe has some of those more abandonment type thought processes or issues. Like, so is like to help. I mean, I know how to help his nervous system,
it's ever
but
too late.
Yeah, good.
We had when my son was really little, something happened to me in labor, and we were separated. And my husband and I never talked about it. Like 8 years, because we're just living life and like trying to get by. And I finally called it out. I was like, "Hey, I thought I was dying, by the way." And he's like, "Yeah, me too." And so we hadn't talked about it in so long. And it made me think back to when my son was probably 4, and he would come out of the house in this primal stance, screaming because he couldn't find me in the house. And we went and we did EMDR on it.
Good for you.
Right?
Yeah.
And for you. Again, the challenge is you have an audience of people who want to learn.
Yeah.
Right? Want to do things different. And when you know better, you do better. But there are so many people out there that don't even know that there is a different way to do it.
I know.
And just because my version of how I do it doesn't mean that my version is right.
Right.
It's right for my family. It's right for me.
Right.
It seems to work for a lot of people. Right? And you'll find what works for your family. There might be some tweaks.
Yeah.
Right?
So true.
I lucked out. My kid is so much like me, and I understand him completely because of that.
Yeah, you get him.
Right? Yeah. But if you have a kiddo who displays fear-based tendencies, then EMDR, he was little when he did it.
Good for you.
And I had him lay on me, and I tapped his chest or tapped his back while he did EMDR, because it's bilateral stimulation. And it desensitizes your amygdala, right? Which is that fight or flight mechanism. And you want to do that when they're little, because we go through so many things that evoke fear, and you don't want the 25% larger amygdala when you become an adult.
Nope.
You don't want that. So along the ways, counseling is a resource. Trauma-informed therapy is a resource that you want to use as often as you can and let them be able to bounce back. It's just a resource for them.
No, that's so wonderful. So you don't work with children humans under 18. You're adult only.
Every once in a while, I'll have a 16-year-old come in.
Okay.
But I don't see children anymore. And a lot of it has to do with divorce and just trying to understand and manage court orders and things like that. Like, I do not want to misstep in that department.
It's a lot.
Right? I don't want to misstep for the child or the parents. And so that's really the main reason that I moved away from that.
No, sounds wise.
Yeah.
So I don't think we don't want to end this conversation without talking about some of your favorite supplements for anxiety, depression, and ADD, because it comes up all the time. So what do you like? What do you see working the best?
I do talk about Lifetime vitamins.
Yeah,
like,
you mentioned that. Yeah, it's great.
Right?
Yeah.
And D3 with K2 for sure, right? A methylated B complex, right? Trying to think of always fish oils, always. For people that have ADD, higher loads of fish oils are really important. And it helps behavior and it helps your system calm down. And then there's a variety of different things. I am actually not a fan of melatonin itself.
Okay.
Because people overdo it. They
Yeah.
abuse it. They don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
I had somebody who was like, well, I take like 15 milligrams of melatonin and I just about fell over because that's going to destroy your liver. I'm pretty sure it goes through your liver. And so you know more about that part. And so I always tell them, like, if you need to do that,
Yeah.
it only helps you fall asleep because they'll say, well, I can't stay asleep.
Yeah.
Right. And so melatonin paired with L-theanine, because
Yeah.
often the reason they can't fall asleep is their mind is racing.
Mm-hmm.
And L-theanine is just fabulous, whether you take it in the morning or you take it for bed.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of softening the noise, right?
I love L-theanine.
And my favorite
For
vitamin
anxiousness.
is magnesium glycinate.
I figured you were going to go there.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
magnesium L-threonate,
Yeah.
depending
I was
upon
gonna
what
say
you're dealing with.
3 and 8. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so good.
But I do talk a lot, depending upon the person and what they're going with, because some of these other things can exacerbate anxiety.
Yeah.
But 5-HTP or CME, I stopped talking about ashwagandha.
I was going to ask about adaptogenic herbs.
Yeah, so I stopped talking about valerian root and
Mm-hmm.
ashwagandha, mostly because I'm not well versed enough on the impact it has on your organs, and
Yeah.
I'm just as concerned about that as I am your brain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I do talk about St. John's wort
Good. Yes.
quite a bit, right?
Yes.
And St. John's wort is so interesting.
amazing. Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting that you can use that with L-lysine for ADD,
Yeah.
right? It's so interesting to me. And I'm very aware of serotonin syndrome. I actually have somebody I'm working with who has serotonin syndrome.
Really?
Yeah, it's the only time I've ever seen it in, a very long time.
Yeah, it's very rare.
Right.
You have to talk about it, but
Yeah.
I've never actually seen it in clinical
Yeah.
practice.
Right.
What was the cause of the serotonin syndrome in this patient?
Things outside of supplements, we'll
Okay,
say, and outside of
okay.
medications.
Yeah, okay.
So you can get that from illegal drugs, right? You can get it from stress. It was just all of the things, lots of trauma for that person.
Wow.
So I pay very close attention to that so people don't get overloaded, because L-lysine, L-tyrosine, and St. John's wort are great together. But my concern with using the L-tyrosine is that serotonin syndrome. If they have
Good.
anything else, it's a no-go.
Yeah, good.
If they're on anything for anxiety, absolutely, we're not talking about those
Okay.
vitamins at all. And that's when I'll say, because I'm a certified brain health coach, I can talk about those things, but I often will say, don't touch that until you talk to your psychiatrist.
Yeah, good.
Don't touch that until you talk to your
You have to
functional
know all the
medicine person.
interactions and yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And sometimes people will show up and they've got a slew of things, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, don't take that one
Yeah.
because you have anxiety.
Yeah. Or just the brand, like the quality
Brand
of
is huge.
supplements that people are buying. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's
Brand is
definitely
huge.
doing more harm than
You know,
good.
because of people come to me for a reason, and the majority of people are pretty well versed. And
I'm
they're
sure.
like, do you trust this brand?
Yeah.
They literally will ask me that.
Yeah.
I'm like, here's what I know. These are kind of the top 3 that I talk
Yeah.
about.
You can't know about all the different brands out there. There's
And I
just too
defer
many.
them to Custom Medica because
Custom Medica, they
they
carry
are
great
so
brands.
well versed at those things.
They know those things. Yeah, we carry very similar brands as Cosmetica. So I'm like, hey, if you're buying it from us or
Right.
Cosmetica, you can pretty much trust.
So
trust
people
the
don't
sourcing.
really realize the impact of magnesium specifically because our food is so depleted, because our soils are so
Soil,
depleted.
right.
The example I was given, I don't know where I heard this, was, probably 15 years ago, you could eat a small bunch of spinach and get the magnesium that you need, and now you would have to eat a truck bed load of spinach to get the magnesium you need.
It's so disheartening. I
Right.
know. Yeah.
And so magnesium, good for your brain, good for anxiety, fabulous for deep sleep if it's magnesium glycinate, muscle repair, your heart, all of these things. It's just a building block.
Does it all. Yeah.
It does all these really great
It's
things.
wonderful. Yeah, it is really disheartening. People that say, well, I'd really love to just eat whole foods to get my nutrients. And I'm like,
I know.
I wish I could tell you that I think
Yeah.
that's a good alternative.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, nowadays, it's just not.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything else you'd like to share with our audience on the topic?
It just
of
popped in
tonight?
my head when
Yeah.
you were saying that.
Yeah.
That people want their whole foods to provide it, which is great. I would love that. Show me where you're growing those.
Yeah.
Where's that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There are some times, and we kind of started off in this path, where medication is appropriate.
Yeah.
And ADD is one of those places because untreated ADD is a dramatically increased risk for dementia and Alzheimer's.
Why is that?
So I talk about ADD as not inattention, but intention problems. It's intention and memory problems.
Okay.
And so why it shows up, is it the MTHFR gene defect
Right.
and you're not methylating vitamins? Is it memory and it's already starting? But it's really important to treat it to get the appropriate dopamine. And a lot of people who are diagnosed with dementia specifically are finding that it actually is depression,
Right.
which is a dopamine-related
Right.
disorder, right? And so if you don't have the right amount of dopamine, your memory goes sideways, you look like you have dementia, but that's not what it is, right? So I really highly encourage people who have ADD to get the right amount of exercise, number one. Protein and supplementation are number 2 and 3. Like if that's the only thing you can do,
Right.
exercising
there.
every single day
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be key.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. We didn't talk about with the importance of protein. Usually a lot of high protein products, animal products are higher in dopamine. So that's the other reason why
Oh, that's
protein's
interesting. I
so
didn't know that.
Yeah.
So that is really, thank
That's
you.
also why
I'll
protein
share
is
that with
so
people.
important for mental
really
health.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You look at like full fat dairy that's higher in protein, or red meats and animal
yeah.
protein, high in protein. So you are such a blessing to have in this community, and you're such a wealth of
you.
knowledge. And even just the way that you deliver information is so calming. And so I'm like,
Thank you.
Shannon, will you come read me a bedtime story? Just such a lovely way of delivering your words.
thank
so
you.
thank you
I
so
know,
much.
it's a
We're
good
so
fit.
thankful to have you here, and thank you for
having
sharing
me.
your
It was
knowledge
great.
and your
I was
wisdom.
excited to be able to meet you and
Oh.
have this opportunity. And
Yeah.
I was telling anybody that knows FMI, I was like, oh, I'm so excited to go do this because
Yeah.
you have a different perspective of some of the things that I do. So,
Yes, we do, and we're so thankful to partner with you to help heal this community.
well, I'm glad you're doing
Absolutely.
this.
Yeah,
People
thanks.
love FMI. So,
Oh,
that's a good
thank
thing.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We feel the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Functional Medicine Foundation's podcast. For more information on topics covered today, specialties available at the FMI Center for Optimal Health, and the highest quality of supplements and more, go to funmedfoundations.com.